Hello and welcome to Smaulgld.com. I want to follow up on SDR talk. We recently discussed the one global currency to enslave us all, and the speculation behind that was that the IMF was behind a Chinese ICO company that was going to digitize all the assets in the world, roll them up into an SDR, and thereby enslave humanity, and that Americans would not be allowed to purchase them. And I think that scenario, at least in my mind, can be put to bed that that's not what's happening. The IMF is not involved in the particular A-chain ICO, and we know why Americans aren't involved, because issuers do not like to include Americans in securities offerings because of the registration requirements and because of the potential liability. However, the SDR is and has been around for decades as a central bank reserve asset. And the dollar during all that time was the reserve currency under the Bretton Woods Agreement since 1944. SDRs came along in 1969 to add liquidity to the two reserve assets which were acting in tandem, which were gold and the US dollar. Today, just the US dollar is the reserve currency, as the peg to gold was removed in 1971. SDR still exist, and they are also a reserve asset, but they're not considered a reserve currency because they only trade amongst other central banks. Now, the IMF has tried unsuccessfully till now to get the concept of the SDR to be more widely accepted, meaning that SDR denominated notes might be issued. And the World Bank did indeed issue an SDR denominated note at the end of 2016, and it was in China, and it's payable in yuan. Now, the thing to remember as we go through this quick discussion about SDRs are they are a basket of currency, and their value is based on dollar, pound, euro, yen, and Chinese yuan. So the first thing you have to remember is the SDR can be a global currency, but not a monolithic global currency, because it relies on and draws its value from the existence of separate currencies. In other words, you can't have an SDR unless you have a dollar, unless you have a yen, unless you have a yuan, unless you have a pound, unless you have a euro. You cannot have an SDR without that. It relies on there being separate currencies. So we have a global currency today, so to speak. It's the dollar. But that's not a one world currency. That's the dollar. The SDR, if it were to become the reserve currency, would merely mean that the dollar would not be the world's reserve currency. It would share the stage with four others. That's not the same thing as a global currency. Now, let's go further into this. There is some speculation you can do once you have that basis. If an ICO company issues tokens based on the price of the SDR, all they're doing is helping the concept of thinking about value based on five currencies instead of just pricing it in dollars or pricing it in yuan or pricing it in pesos, whatever. IMF likes it. They want people to think in terms of SDR. China would like that because why? Well, then not everybody thinks in terms of dollars. They think partially in terms of dollars. Remember the video from the other day, the US dollar is 41% of the SDR. Okay. So if more companies issue securities, whether they're ICOs, IPOs, bond issuance, and they're using SDRs as the basis, well, then people start to think in SDRs more than dollars. However, they will think in terms of what they're going to get paid in. So if China issues, World Bank issues a SDR bond in China, it may be denominated in SDRs, but they get paid in yuan. Why? Because there is no SDR to give people in return. So there's where you get your speculation. Well, wait a minute. If people are thinking in SDRs, because we have this plethora now of issuances of SDR denominated securities, but they don't get paid in SDRs. So why not create an SDR currency that people can actually get? However, that's a little unwieldy because it's always going to be issued on the basis of the 5 currencies and their fluctuating prices. So it's kind of hard to do that. It's not hard to do that. It's just that's probably one of the reasons why people do not want to price their things in SDRs, because the yen could be having a bad day or the dollar could be having a bad day, but the yuan is up, and you don't get the same certainty of just knowing where one currency is. You got to track the 5 currencies. However, if that were to be the case and they can get wider acceptance of use of the SDR, and then they even issued an SDR, the world really doesn't change. Well, you say, wait a minute, that's the death of the dollar. The dollar then goes from being the world's reserve currency to having only 41% of the SDR basket. Well, think about this. The ECB, the BOJ, the BOE, and China, they all have the same advantages in a way as the dollar does, because you would think that only the United States could have gotten away with QE, printing money, driving interest rates down to 0. But wait a minute, doesn't Japan do the same thing? Didn't Japan take its rates below 0? Isn't Japan still doing QE? Isn't the Bank of England still doing QE? Doesn't ECB have its rates down to rock bottom, and aren't they doing QE? So it's not like you need to have the world's reserve currency so you can just boss people around and create and have reckless monetary policy. No, guess what? The dollar, the yuan, the yen, the pound, and the euro and their respective central banks can do exactly the same thing, even if there were an SDR. They all can do it. They all do it now. So the point about speculation is this is not a one world currency when you have an SDR taking over, if it were to do so, because you would still need the other central banks and the other currencies to exist in order to give the SDR value. So now we're back to, well, what about the IMF taking control of the world's assets? Well, that has nothing to do about what I just talked about. If an ICO company issues some token based on the price of the SDR, that doesn't mean the IMF gets anything. It doesn't mean that the countries in the SDR get anything. It doesn't mean the central banks that run those currencies get anything. It just means that a company is issuing a security based on the value of SDRs. Now, you can speculate that the IMF may one day wish to issue an SDR publicly traded. But again, that's not a one world currency, because any more than the dollar is a one world currency. The global reserve currency and the currency a lot of people use in the SDR form is one that's based on other currencies. So it's not a one world currency. The real danger, I think, what speculators worry about, is a monolithic one world currency that is issued without reference to other currencies. It's just the currency that is issued, and that's it. It has one price around the world. Now, the problem with anything like that, as the communists found out, if you don't have a reference point, you don't know how to price things. So that's what that happened in communist Russia. They don't know what the price of things are because there's no price discovery. So I don't think it makes any sense to think there'd be a one world currency other than something like the SDR, which really isn't a one world currency. It's a value based on other currencies in the world. To create this one world currency that has basically no reference point on which to value things. And also, you do have still, even though I think what's happening is you have the ECB, the BOJ, the BOE, the People's Bank of China, and the Fed, they all work together. So whether the United States loses its power as a monolithic issuer of the global currency, or whether they all share it amongst themselves, I think for the average person, for you and me, nothing changes. But that doesn't mean that they're then going to digitize all the assets and put them into the SDR. Anyway, let me get your thoughts. Thank you very much, everyone who has commented on very respectfully, have put some very good thoughts down. I've read the comments on the SGT report. I've read the comments on JSNIP. I've read the comments on my site. So tell me what you think. Thank you.